Everybody, last night President Trump released declassified records he says expose major weaknesses in U.S. elections, including Chinese access to voter data and vulnerabilities in electronic voting systems. He did not mention Georgia in the address, but the documents list the state among affected jurisdictions and cite concerns with the ImageCast X ballot marking systems used here. The records do not show that votes were changed. The president framed the release as part of his long-running push for tougher election safeguards.
For many years, I've called for bold, swift, and decisive action to protect the integrity of America's elections. Every American deserves to know that when they cast their vote, that vote will be counted accurately in a system, and that is to make that system secure.
We're getting reaction from both sides of the aisle this morning. We're starting with a Republican reaction with Georgia Republican Party Chair Josh McKoon. Josh, great to see you this morning.
Thank you for having me.
You listened to the speech last night. What was your biggest takeaway? Did you learn anything new?
Well, I think what the president had to say about Chinese infiltration of election systems and compromising confidential voter data, to me, was the most shocking takeaway of his address. Obviously, there's a lot to sort through. But at the end of the day, this president is committed to making sure that every lawful vote is counted and that we have fair elections. I couldn't agree with him more.
And looking ahead to the midterm elections, do you trust that they'll be fair as is?
Well, we're going to work really hard to make sure they're fair. We have a very strong election integrity program at the Georgia Republican Party, a combination of paid lawyers, volunteer lawyers, poll watchers. We spend really from now until after Election Day working very hard to make sure that our election integrity laws in this state are followed.
Do you think the president is spending too much time, too little, or just the right amount talking about 2020 versus looking ahead to 2026 November?
Well, I think if you listen to the full address last night, the president was not focused on 2020 as some of his detractors tried to claim. What the theme of the speech last night was about is having fair elections in 2026. And he was talking about prior issues that we've had, but he was talking about it in the sense of we want to make sure these elections we have in a few months are fair and that illegal votes are excluded and that only legal votes are counted.
You mentioned the Chinese allegations shows they obtained voter data, not necessarily manipulating the results of the election from what we learned last night. And for what it's worth, last night China said in response that it has never and will never interfere in the U.S. presidential elections. What do you make of that at face value?
I don't know what else the Chinese regime would have said, frankly, but I think that the president is right to be concerned about foreign interference in our elections. I certainly took it seriously when Democratic administrations made those allegations, even though they wound up not being borne out when we went through a judicial process. But at the end of the day, we need to do everything we can in this country to secure our elections. We need our voters to be confident in our elections process. Here in Georgia, recent polling shows 1 in 5 Republican voters don't have confidence in our elections process. We need to work as hard as we can to get to 100% confidence in our elections. And that's why the election integrity programs this president's talking about, that we're talking about at the Georgia Republican Party, are so important because they reinforce confidence in our process.
And the president last night on that point, pushing Congress to pass the Save America Act, faces an uphill battle here. Some Republicans against it for the very reason that they believe it should be left up to the states. Where do you fall on that?
So there are a lot of ways that the federal government currently regulates elections. The required period of time to conduct a runoff election, the fact that we're required to offer people the opportunity to register to vote when they get their driver's license, those are all federal requirements. The Save America Act is a common sense national reform of elections. It's asking for 2 things: displaying a photo ID to prove who you are when you vote, and proving your citizenship when you vote. If you look at polls on this, it's an 80% issue. The vast majority of the American people support the idea that someone ought to be able to prove who they are when they go vote, just like when you purchase alcohol or get admitted to a John Ossoff rally where you're required to show a photo ID. And the same thing with citizenship.
If polling shows this is an 80% issue, why is that not reflective in Congress?
Well, you've got to ask yourself why the Democratic Party is so apparently opposed to these common sense basic reforms. I would suggest it is because elements of the Democratic Party routinely try to skirt election laws to try to win elections. And so it's disappointing. I think that we ought to have bipartisan support of this. The president talked about how this ought to be an issue we can all rally around as a nation. And I hope voters demand it at the next election.
Finally, Senator Warnock last night said the president is sowing doubt in an election he knows he's about to lose in response to the address. What's your response to that? My
response to that is what I listened to last night was a president of the United States identifying critical issues with regard to the security of our elections. And if you believe in the democratic process, you ought to want to do everything you can to secure the election. This should not be a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. It's an American issue.
Is this going to continue to be an issue for the rest of our existence?
I hope not, because I hope that as we move forward, this issue is going to become a bipartisan issue. You know, remember when President Trump first ran in 2015, he talked about immigration and people said it was a throwback and there was no support for it. We hear no conversation anymore about sealing our border and making sure our borders are secure, because that's where the vast majority of the American people are. Sometimes it takes time to get there, but I think we're going to get there.
Josh McKoon, we appreciate you coming on this morning.